So this is the last parsha of Bereshis. I'm going to moot you all. I'm going to moo you all. I want to talk about the absence of God, about when God leaves, when God departs, when you expected him and then he's not there. And so I'm going to share my screen. Of course, I never know where the hell I am. Here we are. And let's just look at this one pasuk. Vayikro Yaakov el Bonov, and Jacob summoned his sons to give them the blessings. But he doesn't go right into the blessings. He says first, Hey Osfu, gather round. V'agidu lachem, the Vav is the cohortative, so that I may tell you. Eis asher yikra etchem, what's going to happen to you ba'achris hayomim, in the end of days. And then he goes into the brachos. He doesn't tell you what's going to happen in the end of the days. So the Medrash has to jump in and say there's a gap between this verse and the next verses, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, giving them his final blessing. The Medrash has to jump in because this never happened. He never told them what will happen ba'acharit yamim. The Netziv says acharit yamim means at the end of days, meaning the end of the time when you're going to go through the Midbar and you're going to be ready to go into Eretz Yisrael. But most of the Mefarshim say acharit hayamim means the kates, the end of the galut. Which galut? And most say it doesn't mean Mashiach and Geula. It's just what's going to happen before that. So the Medrash jumps in. And let's share with you the Medrash. The first Agadah is from Psachim. Vayikro Yaakov el Bonov vayomei osu yagidu lechem es asher yigra'im. That's the pasuk, our proof text. And now the Gemara says something very interesting. Bikesh Yaakov lagalos lebonov kates hayomim. Mosai tovo hageula hashlema. So he wants to tell them the future. He knows they're going to be in Galut. And so he wants to give them the secret of the end of days. When will the Geula, the final Geula come? And now the rabbis tell us why he didn't. He didn't tell them, Nistalko mimenu shchina, v'lo yachol lenaveh. If you're a prophet, you need the shchina incarnated in you. You need to have access to the divine knowledge. But nistalko mimeno shchina, the shchina removed itself. The God was no longer present. There was an absence of God. What happens when God is absent? When God leaves the scene? Lo yachol lo nenaveh. Of course, he cannot tell them the future, because the Shekhinah was not with him. God isn't with him. And now he has a panic attack. And we've talked about this. Omar, he says, Shema chas v'shalom yesh b'mitosi. Pasul, maybe one of you, the reason that the Shekhinah isn't coming to me, the reason I have no access to the divine is because one of you is an oisvarf. Maybe one of you contaminated my bed, contaminated the Yotzei Chalotzov, contaminated the future of Am Yisrael. Why? We've had this before, he says. Grandfather Abraham Look what happened to him. A psul came out of him, Yishmael. And my father, Yitzchak, sheyotze mimeno Esav. Esav came out of him. Umishum kach nisgalcha shchina. And maybe that's why the shchina has left me. The first thing he does is this panic attack, blaming the boys. Maybe one of you is an oisvarf. Amru lo banov. So the children say to him in unison, Shema Yisrael. Now you listen, O Jacob. Avinu, Yisrael Avinu, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. None of us has any psul. We're all with you on the same page, ideologically, religiously, mystically. V'kach amru, kashem she'ein belibcha elo Hashem echad, kach ein belibenu elo echad. Just like you believe in the single unity of the divine, so do we. Ba'oisa shah pasach Yaakov Avinu va'amra, v'shibech, and he praised them, or praised God. Baruch Shem Kavod Machus Oli Olam Bo'ed. We actually praise this every day in our liturgy. The question is, why do we say Baruch Shem Kavod quietly? Well, Moshe Rabbeinu said Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad in Devarim, Pashas V'eschanan. He didn't say Baruch Shem Kavod, so the rabbis are very bothered. Are you going to privilege Jacob over Moshe Rabbeinu? To say Moshe Rabbeinu without Baruch Shem Kavod is a pagam, it's a flaw in Jacob. And to say it loudly is a flaw in Moshe, who never said it. So we say it softly. Oh, it's so cute. That's why we say, except on Yom Kippur, Baruch Shem Kavod, softly. We don't want to affect the honor of Moshe Rabbeinu, who never said it. So Baruch Shem Kavod then becomes Jacob's response to his own panic attack about the quality of his children, their spiritual integrity. And then does the Shekhinah come back to him? No. So we have to go to a different source to find out if that was just a panic attack, it should have come back to him. And so we have to go to the Medrash Rabbah. And the Medrash Rabbah says something very interesting. He wanted to reveal the end, v'niskaso mimena. Interesting expression. It doesn't say nistalka hashchina. This is Bereishis Rabbah, 3rd, 4th century. Nistalka hashchina, that's what Rashi quotes the Tanhuma and the Gemara Psachim. But the Bereishis Rabbah says, niskasa mimena. It was hidden from him. There's no absence of God. God is everywhere. So then it was hidden from him. Okay, why? And in true to its midrashic style, I'm going to present to you 3 parables. You need to understand that the function of the parable is to tell you something that in regular speech couldn't be said. It's too radical. So we hide it in this mashal, this fictional narrative. But it's really quite radical if you just listen to the mashal. Because it sounds like really frum and very orthodox and typical, right? The king had a beloved friend, and he was about to leave the world. And so his children are gathered around him. V'hoyabonov sovavim es mitoso. Sound familiar? This is a direct parallel with Jacob. Amalahem. So he says to them, Bo, come close. I want to whisper something to you. Agale lochem mistoiron shel melech. I want to tell you the king's hidden secrets. I'm going to tell you the real story of Trump. I want to tell you where all the bodies are buried so that you will know how to navigate and negotiate the politics of Washington. I want to tell you the mysteries of the king. Tola Einov, he looked up, and suddenly, he saw the king in the window. So what does he do? All the kids are standing around him very closely. Listen, Dad, okay, tell us. What does he say? Hey, you Zahirin, Bechvod HaMelech. I want you to be faithful, loyal Trumpists. I want you to look after the king. Kach Yaakov Avinu Tola Einov, when Jacob was about to tell them the secrets of the end of time, Rosh Shechina Omedes al Gabbai. He saw the Shechina. Amar lahem Zahirin Bechvod HaShalakot. So he gives them all the Musa, Reuven, Shimon, Levi. It is an unbelievable medrash. What is so bothersome about this medrash? Number one, in the mashal, clearly the moment the Ohav of the Melech sees the king, he switcheroos. He doesn't tell them the mysteries and the secrets where the bodies are buried. He gives them the Orthodox party line. Be a good party servant to the apparatchik. Be a good communist. Be a good Trumpist, right? Whatever the king wants to hear. He does not tell him the mystery, the secrets. So the Nimshal seems to be that when Jacob is about to tell us the end of time and the end of Galut, what happens? He looks up, V'ra Shechina Omedes al Gobov. Now that is different to what the Gemara said. The Gemara said Shechina departed him. It left him. God was no longer there. He was absent. When Joseph died, that same thing happened. He's sitting Shiva, and for 17 years, the Shechina isn't with him. So when it says Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, that Vayechi means, he was reconnected to the Shechina because he was no longer in Avelut. In the Gemara, the Shechina left him. Here, he looks up, the Shechina is still there, but he's bloody embarrassed to tell them the secret, like the mashal of the king. Now, I just want to tell you two others that Kasha brings, which were from manuscripts. One is, Le'eved shetaminu hamelech al kol ma sheyesh lo. There was a servant of the king who knew where everything, all the assets of the king were. Bo'osa ha'eved lamut, when that servant came to die, kora labonov lasosim b'nei chorin. He said, I know where these documents of your freedom, you are no longer will be a slave. I have these documents of freedom. B'nei chorin v'lo lahen heichon hu dituke. Dituke is a Greek loan word for a shtar cherut, a shtar matana, a shtar mechira. So that I know you get those and you can get out of jail. You can get out of slavery. He's telling these kids. Yoda HaMelech, the king who has spies, found out about this seance, this secret meeting with the deathbed scene. V'amad lo milamala mimenu. So he comes and visits him at the deathbed. Ra oso ha'eved. So the servant sees him. V'hivlik as hadova mevakesh legalos lahem. So he puts it away. He doesn't tell them. Hitchil amar lahem bakosha avodim shel melech atem. So he tells them, I want you to be good slaves of the king. He was about to tell him where the bodies were buried, where you can find the shtar. It's in a room. You go in there, you open the safe, and you got your freedom. Then the king finds out, and he has to change his story. The third one is Moshe Malach Shemelech she'asa le'ova Kutulkus. He gave him the Congressional Medal of Honor. You are one of the most choicest subjects of mine. He'eminu al ha'otzros shel hamelech. He told him where the treasures are buried. So he wants to tell the boys, this is where the gold is buried. The moment he saw the king, he was behala, he was completely flummoxed, and he said, Omar, have a mechabdin es hamelech kashem she kibadati ani. I want you to be a good servant like I was, a good subject like I was. In all these three mishalim, the parable explodes in your face if you take it literally. If you understand that the nistalka hashchina, that the shchina wasn't removed from him, it was right there. And when Jacob was about to tell them the secret, he looked up and there was the shchina, there was the king. He couldn't tell them the secret. Why? Clearly from the Mishalim, he was about to tell them something they shouldn't have known. Only he was privy to that knowledge because he was a friend of the king, Congressional Medal of Honor of the king, a beloved of the king. So he was about to divulge confidential information that was only meant for him. So he was struggling. He had sons. He was dying. He wanted to give his sons the secret that was given to him that was obviously in his head illegitimate to do. Because the moment he saw the king, he shut up and he said, be good servants, be good. Is that what's going on in Yaakov's head? The Moshel is telling us that there was something subterfuge going on in Jacob when he was telling them, according to the Midrash, telling them the Kates Hayomim, the end of the Geula, that somehow he knew that was a secret meant only for him and not for them. And so when he sees the Shekhinah, he doesn't say anything, which explains the gap, and he goes straight into the brachos. So I've given you two aspects of what's going on. I want to share with you just one more, and that's the Tanchuma, because really, Rashi is quoting the Tanchuma, so we have to give obeisance to that. So the Tanchuma says, I'm going to bring you an intertext. He brings a posuk from Daniel, and God reveals the time of redemption. The book of Daniel contains secrets of the Messianic age. And then he says to him, and thou, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book. I don't want you to tell anyone what I've told you. So Jacob, according to the Tanchuma, wished to disclose to his sons that very same end of days. And he says, however, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sealed him. He restrained him by quoting that verse from Daniel. The Tanchuma is saying that God prevented him from doing it because later on at the last book of the Bible in Daniel, when Daniel gets this secret from God, God says, shut the mouth, do not reveal it, which of course has given to all sorts of soothsayers and entists throughout the last 2 millennium, trying to interpret that book of Daniel, trying to interpret when the case through any kind of numerology and everything like that. Very nice. We've gone through the Medrash, we've gone through the Gemara and Psachim, Nistalka Shechina, or he saw the Shechina, or he was told to shut up. Whatever it is, the gap in the text reveals that he couldn't reveal the end. Now, I want to share with you what the Hasidic masters did with that, just to show, to compare and to contrast. And so I'm going to bring to you 3 masters. The first will be the Tiferes Shlomo, the Reb Shlomo of Radomsk. And I want to show you this because I really want you to see why I, in my own life, saw Polish Hasidus as the continuation of Midrash in so many ways, That is, using the same hermeneutical texts, the same midrashic tropes, the same way the Medrash mangles the text and does violence to the text and turns it on itself and brings mishalim to expose the deep, dark secrets in the minds of our patriarchs. The Hasidic Rebbes are doing the same thing with a different slant, with that notion of the Baal Shem revolution, that spiritual revolution. So let's just take a look to see what the Tiferes Shlomo says. V'zeh shenema Yaakov Avinu, es asher yikra eschem ba'achris hayomim. Same pasuk interpretation. Shehoyo mispalel. When the Shekhinah departs him, that means the Shekhinah was with him. Well, what do you do when the Shekhinah is with you? You're davening, of course. You're in the presence of the Shekhinah, you daven. And what's he davening about? Al achris hayomim, koidem bias hagoel. Remember I said to you, achris hayomim isn't the geula. It's the Kates Hayomim. It's the end of Galut. It's the worst time. It's the time before the Geula, which is considered in the Gemara in Chagiga and Sanhedrin 91, the worst time, the worst suffering before the Kates, before the end. So he is davening according to the Tiferes Shlomo. It's such a sweet Torah. Yaakov is dying and he's got his children around him and he sees the Shekhinah and he's davening for the Kates Hayomim because he's had the Nevuah. He knows what's going to happen at the Kates Hayomim. She'ein bono od koyach lisbo la yesurim bikovid agolos hama. Oh my God, living after this Shoah. I mean, these words are sticking out like red beacon lights, that we can't stand it. We can't take it. We don't have the power to suffer it anymore. The Yisurim, bikovid agolus, from the weight of Galut. Hinei yikra eschem bekriya ba'alma. V'yeh hamshicha elov bekriya. So he's saying, I want this to be a revelation. I want them to know exactly what's going to happen, to fortify and strengthen them. And so what were they doing? Because they saw that he was in such pain. So they were saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, don't worry, we can do it. That is a prayer that the Tiferes Shlomo adds, because he's at the end of Golus. He knows what's going on in the 1900s. They're comforting Yaakov by pointing out that he should be happy with the knowledge that Hashem will be one. Baruch Shem Kavod Machoso. It's such a passionate Tiferes Shlomo. But let's go darker. As you know, I always do. And let's go and take a look. The Sfas Emes, regarding, quoting the Medrash, regarding Yaakov's desire to reveal the end. And so the Sfas Emes says, the end is the historical end of the exile. The end is the end of the exile, the end of the afflictions. This is how the classic way of those living in Galut to believe that the Geula will arrive. Afal pisha yisma meya, even though he will tarry, it will nevertheless come. The Sfas Emes refuses to accept this approach or find consolation in it. He says, what is the practical ramification of such knowledge? meaning just knowing it, that's not an experience, that's an ontological experience. It's not an existential experience. Okay, I know it's going to end. Good. That doesn't help me. So for him, the end of Galut, very radical Torah, is not an issue of time, but rather of essence. Because evil doesn't descend from heaven. Galut is therefore false. It's an optical illusion. It's a blindness of the eye, a deficiency in the observer from whose perspective it appears as there's evil in the exile. This illusion is finite. It has no substance or truth. Therefore, it has an end termination because falsehood has no basis or continued existence. And so he talks about Hester, that the Galut is a Hester upon him, and it only needs the right eye to see it, not as one of suffering. I felt I needed to bring that to you, although it didn't resonate with me. I love this idea that he says, telling us all the theology, you know, is all very nice. That's ontological Torah, but that's not existential Torah. What we want is existential Torah. And then we come to the Shem Mishmor. Shem Mishmor is already coming around to our century. He's the son-in-law of the Sochachova, the grandson of the Kotzker Rebbe. So for him, everything is blatant truth. There's no fakery. So what's going on with this holding back of the Shechina? Ach barashi isa das acher shebikish legalis is akates. First, he brought the Targum, which I don't want to go into. But then he says, he comes back to Rashi and says, you know, nevertheless, Rashi brings a different opinion, quoting the Tanchuma. Shebikish legalis is akates v'nistalko mimena hashchina. He wasn't looking at the Shechina, but the Shechina departed him. V'nira lefarish. The kasher histakel b'mareh hanavua. When he looked through the spectacles of prophecy, he's like the Tefera Shlomo here. V'ra et kol yaldei hayom vatzoros sheyavru al bonov. And he saw the tzoros of the 4 Goliaths that were going to affect Am Yisrael. Ad sheyisku lebias HaMashiach, until the point at the end of that, lebiat HaMashiach, lo hoyo lochel lisbo. Now we come to a psychological moment that the Tiferet Shlomo didn't cross. Here, the Shem Mishmuel with this 19th century notion of the self and the psyche that these Rebbes are finally opening up to in the winds of the turn of the fan de sekel. Lo yachol lisbol b'tzar bonov. Why? Well, he rachamon sheba avos k'medrash. He was the most merciful, meaning that Yaakov is the Midah of Rachamim. Avram is the Midah of Chesed, unbounded love for everything, everybody. Yitzchak is Gevura, it's retraction, it's restriction. And Yaakov is that balance of Rachamim. So he's the Rachamon of all the others. So for sure, he would be filled with grief as to what's going to be in the future. Well, of course. Now he's gone back into his grief. The Shechina can't be on him because you have to be besimcha. As it says in Shmuel, when Shmuel wanted to get prophecy, and in Shmuel, when the king wanted to get prophecy, he brought in the man to play the lyre to bring him some joy. And then he brings this amazing Zohar, which I want to end on, because he opens us to the exact mirror image. You think That it was because of him that the Shechina was mistalek. And I'm going to read to you the Zohar. And the Zohar says as follows. Come and see. The moment that Jacob called his sons, Abraham, Isaac, and Abraham and Isaac appeared there with the Shechina above them. Interesting. So he's calling his sons, and the Tata and the Zeta are present, and with them the Shechina, to join the patriarchs, to bind their souls as one, becoming a Merkava for the Shechina. So this is a high point for the Zohar. Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov are at his deathbed. He's about to join them upstairs. They come down to join him with the Shechina to unify Klal Yisrael, to solidify the ecclesia of Knesset Yisrael finally. And what happened? Gather round that I may tell you what will befall you ba'achris hayomim, in the end of days. Okay. And suddenly Shechina was saddened and departed. It's a dazzling Zohar. Who departed? The Shechina. Why did she part? Not because he was sad. He's telling us the Nevuah of the end of days. Yes, the Tiferet Shlomo and the Shem Mishmur said he was full of tsar, and that's why the Shechina had to have left. No. The Shem Mishmur says at the end, Umotsasi da zu bezoya. At the end, the Shem Mishmur wants to give us some comfort. He said, I found a Zohar that says the opposite. And the Zohar says that the Shechina, ba'achris yomim, she sees the suffering of Klal Yisrael, and she can't stand it. She has to go away to cry. She cannot be present. And that's why he didn't say it. She wasn't with him to validate and to say, I'll take care of you. I'll be there with you. Anochi im chobetzora. She couldn't handle it. So the Shechina had to leave. Do you understand theologically what this implies? It is the Shechina who, as it were, was saddened in department. And afterwards, when the son said, Shema Yisrael, Hashem, that's Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, which is Kutchabrichu, Elokeinu, which is Adnus, which is Malchus, which is the Shechina, Hashem Echad. When the son said that, she came back. And they opened, and she came back, immediately said, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso. Malchus is the Shechina. He blessed the Shechina because she came back. It's an absolutely dazzling Zohar that we now have to try and put together with everything we've learned in the sense of what is this question of coherence and the absence of the divine, the departure of the Shechina, the absence of God. This originally, we have tracked a millennium of text in a short time in which the absence of God generates the panic attack, the anxiety in Jacob, or the absence of the divine is present because there is a hastoras upon him throughout our galut. He sees the absence of divine in the galut, and he has a panic attack. He says, I cannot tell you what this is about, because I don't know if you'll be able to survive. And the Tiferet Shlomo says, I don't know if we can survive. He's mesupik because of the tsar. It's a moment of dread. And the poignancy of the moment is underscored by the son's response. The meter is sholem precisely because the sons tell him, don't you worry, Dad. We got this. You don't want to tell us what's going to be, how bad it's going to be? We got this. Don't worry. And I think that that's what makes Shema Yisrael the critical historical doxology Remember, when did that come into being, that a person would say Shema Yisrael al Kiddush Hashem? Very late, after these midrashim. Who said that you're supposed to say Shema Yisrael as the last thing on your lips? And yet every Jew, they went into the gas chambers and they were frum and not frum, and they all said together Shema Yisrael as the gas was pouring in. So I think that this idea of God's absence and the Hastoras Ponim is precisely the secret of Galut. The secret of Klal Yisrael is not in its theology. We don't need all that selling. We don't need to sell theology. We're not salesmen. We don't need books about theology. Okay, Jonathan has to write them. I think it was great for the respect in the Goyish world for us. But for us, it's not an ontological issue. It's an experiential issue. That is the message of the Baal Shem HaKodesh. How do I live with the Shechina in a state of Hastoras Ponim? How do I get through this Acharis Hayomim in the absence of the divine? When we don't have Noviim. We had Rabbi Pinto here in town giving us all sorts of brachos and stuff. So there were those who claimed to have knowledge, but for people like me, you know, all I have is the Torah HaKdosha, which is the Malchus, which is the Shechina. That's what we have to hold on to. That's what gives us the faith despite, the faith in the absence. I think that's the message of Yaakov. Yaakov is telling you, Hagidu, es haketz hayomim, and there's a gap. Maybe that gap is not because of Nistalik Shechina, or the Shechina was present, or the king came looking in like a naughty boy. I think the deepest message of the gap is that we have to fill in that gap with our biology, with our history, with our personal biographies. That gap is there because the beginning of the parsha was stuma. There was no gap, and the only parsha in the Torah that has no gap between the previous parsha, and the Mefarshim go crazy about it. Well, here's the gap, I would like to suggest. The gap is right here. And Yaakov is giving us this message that in the hastara, in the silence, in the lacuna of the text, is where we have to put our own biographies, our own struggles. That is what our job as Klal Yisrael in the absence of the divine.